What if your church got hijacked one Sunday service by a protest about a hot button political issue in your culture? How would you respond? Well, the church in Minneapolis just had to answer that question for themselves in real time because it just happened to them. The temperature is turning up for the saints here in America, folks. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the tape, we're going to talk X's and O's so that you can be ready even when you're out of season to give a good confession for King Jesus. I'm St. K. This is Foreign Saints, keeping Christianity unique by reviving the hearts of those who are called to die daily. A couple of disclaimers before we get into the meat and potatoes though, okay? This is not a video endorsing the church or the leadership of the church. I'll explain why in a little bit. And this is also not a video celebrating the death of Renee Goodman. I'll also explain that as we go. But what this video is three things. It is training for you if you consider yourself a Christian. It's training for you if you find yourself in a similar situation to what these guys found themselves in. 2, this video, I hope, will serve as a call for elders of churches everywhere to embrace their role as shepherds and theological anchors. And thirdly, this will be a behind-the-scenes look at the mindset of those that you may consider to be your political opponents. All right, so what we have here, Don Lemon doing some investigative journalism. Well, more like chronicling, like live chronicling journalism. He's live streaming. He was live streaming this entire protest thing, along with some other stuff that happened in Minneapolis that day. But we're going to look at this, all right? Before we look at the actual meat and potatoes of the protest itself and what happened within the walls of the church, I want you to hear from the woman in charge after it was all said and done, to hear what she had to say, all right? The reason that they targeted this church was for one man, and that's where some of the complications and nuance come in, all right? But let's hear what she has to say real quick.
Is the director for the field office of ICE in St. Paul. He also serves as a pastor right here at City's Church. So if you Google City's Church, you will see David Easterwood's name there. If you Google him, you will also see him at a press conference that was held by C-SPAN, standing next to Kristi Noem. And also the lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU in December on behalf of 6 Minnesota residents that just went in front of Judge Melendez, and where she put an injunction against ICE for them being able to retaliate against peaceful protesters. His name is in those court documents, again, as the director of the field office for ICE in St. Paul. Yes. That is unacceptable. How can you be a pastor of a church, but overseeing ICE agents in the field? We know that ICE agents just killed Renee Good. We know that they shot a Venezuelan nationalist. We know that they almost killed a 6-month-old baby in North Minneapolis, as well as terrorized their whole family of 6. Had to send 3 of their children to the hospital, 2 of which had asthma, as they fired tear gas and flashbang grenades at the cars of innocent people. We know that they dragged people out of their cars, out of their homes. They dragged pregnant women. They beaten and attacked immigrants and U.S. citizens. So how dare somebody claim to be a pastor while overseeing evil? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now you guys heard that pastor pray. Dear Lord, please chasten us to get our house in order. That was the perfect prayer for such a time as this. Because that's what we came to do. Get your house in order. Don't pretend to be a church while harboring evil. Unacceptable. In addition to being a lawyer, I am.
Now, that's the sort of, impassioned, all we do is read type of speech that would usually get me to hit the applause button, one of my applause buttons up here. But, oh man, when you check under the hood of the theology here, there are problems, all right? I usually like to let people, play their whole clip in entirety. so that you can feel the full rhetorical force of what they're saying. But you heard in the clip so far, she claims that David Easterwood, a pastor or elder at this particular church in, Minneapolis or whatever, is the field director for ICE agents in the city of St. Paul. She claims that this makes him complicit and responsible for the acts and systemic practices of injustices by many ICE agents within the city. Now, the reason I said earlier that I can't endorse this church is because I don't know how true any of what she said is. All right? Because if what she said is true, well, I certainly don't want to endorse that, right? But it's also important because if you are a pastor that oversees law enforcement agents in any way, like, vocationally speaking, like that's, your job to put food on the table, then you have to care about Romans 13 and the book of Proverbs more than most. All right? Like you have to. All right, looking at Romans 13 here, verses 1 to 7 are what you see on your screen. Looking at verse 1, Paul writing, "Let everyone submit to the governing authorities, since there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are instituted by God." Okay? Now, there's going to be some nuance here as I read through Romans 13. All right? It's going to feel like I'm on your side. For those of you listening that are partisan, it's going to feel like I'm on your side, and then it's going to feel like I'm not on your side. Okay? Just bear with me because I'm a Christian, okay? That it tends to happen like that, all right? But this first verse, this everyone, when Paul says let everyone submit to the governing authorities, that everyone includes government agents themselves, okay? And this is important to note. ICE agents need to remember that the authority they wield is a borrowed authority from God. It does not stem from themselves ontologically, okay? The authorities that exist are instituted by God. Therefore, you are accountable to God at the end of time for how you wielded the authority that he allowed you to borrow from him in the spheres of authority that you traveled in your places and spaces through life. All right. They also need to recall what John the Baptist said in Luke chapter 3, verse 14 to the soldiers when the Roman soldiers asked John the Baptist what repentance would look like for them. And John the Baptist told them, "Don't take money from anyone by force or false accusation and be satisfied with your wages." In other words, don't wield your just authority unjustly for your own benefit, but instead protect and serve as God would have you do. Okay. Now, the protesters, right? So that's a verse that kind of cuts against misuses of authority by ICE and all the things that she's talking about. And if you don't think those things are happening in any way, shape, or form, then, come out from under the Republican rock you're living under. Yeah, they do. I don't know in what percentage. I don't know if it's more often than not. I don't know if it's less often than not. But those sorts of misuses of power are happening. That much is true. And so the church should care about it. Now, verse 2, though, verses 2 through 4 is where the protesters now are going to get cut by the scripture, okay? Because when you look at verse 2, Paul continues, "So then, the one who resists the authority is opposing God's command, and those who oppose it will bring judgment on themselves." Okay? And this is why I have to say, I'm not celebrating the death of Renee Goodman, but I'm also not just going to blindly act like she had no part in what happened, okay? Renee Goodman, she did resist authority when ICE agents gave her a command for her to get out of her vehicle, which, as far as I can tell, is within their authority to issue, right? And once she starts resisting the lawful authority giving a lawful command, she runs the risk of judgment coming down on her, and it did in her case, potentially lethally so. You know, she kind of, there is a very real sense in which she brought that on herself, but there's also a very real sense in the thing that was brought on herself very well could have been injustice. And I'll get to that in my next point. But Paul continues, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you want to be unafraid of the one in authority? Do what's good, and you will have its approval, for it is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason, for it is God's servant. Government is God's servant, an avenger that brings wrath on the one who does wrong. Okay? That doesn't mean that everything government does is good, right? This is talking about what they should do, what they should be. And they're not always what they should be, obviously, right? But our culture is particularly allergic to authority. And so anytime the government wields its God-given sword, people tend to have a problem just with the fact that they used the sword. Not even so much how, right? If you're using your sword unjustly, of course, we got a problem with that. But they don't carry the sword for no reason, okay? However, this is where the sword swings back. You know, we cut the ICE agents in verse 1, we cut the protesters in verse 2. Now we come back to cutting the ICE agents again, okay? Because the ICE agent who shot Renee Goodman shot more than one shot. And when you look at the tape, when you look at all the different tapes, in my opinion, only the first shot seems to be defensible as self-defense, okay? There's a good video done by a couple of self-defense case lawyers. I'll try and remember to link their video description in my their video link in my video description, so that you can go look at them as what I think to be as a good sober-minded resource, on initial thoughts on Renee Goodman's situation. All right, but from what I could tell, only the first shot that ICE agent fired seems to be pretty easily defensible as self-defense. But every subsequent shot looks very difficult to argue self-defense from a legal perspective. So depending on, and again, this is where the nuance comes in, right? Depending on which of his shots actually took her life, he may be able to argue self-defense successfully if it was the first shot, or not if it was any one of the subsequent shots. And therefore, in accordance with Romans 13, if the ICE agent's unwarranted shots were what took the life of Renee Goodman, then according to Romans 13, that ICE agent ought to be subject to God's wrath via government, as he would be a wrongdoer at that point. And scripturally, that would mean the death penalty. Okay, at least it should mean that. Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, God says to Noah, whoever sheds human blood, by humans his blood will be shed, for God made humans in his image. Renee Goodman is a human being created in the image of God, and if her life was taken unjustly by a government official, then according to God's law, and this has not been reneged in the new covenant, then his life should be taken. Right? His life is forfeit for unjustly taking the woman's life. If it was one of his unjustified shots that killed her, if it was his first shot that was probably justified, then that's not the case. Again, nuance. Love it or hate it, you got to deal with it. Now, Romans chapter 13, verse 7 is interesting. Paul says, pay your obligations to everyone. Taxes to those you owe taxes, tolls to those you owe tolls, respect to those you owe respect, and honor to those you owe honor. Okay? Verse 7 to me, I think, is a clear verse that applies against illegal immigration. Why? Because if you claim that America is your country, then you have to, as Paul says, pay your obligations to everyone, not just in money and revenue like taxes and tolls, but also in, more in the intangibles, respect and honor, right? If you claim to be an American citizen, then you are claiming to be subject to America's governing authority, and as such, you should start the process of becoming legal. If you don't, then you are as it says in verse 2, resisting the authority that God instituted, and you are running the risk of bringing judgment on yourself. Okay, these are the nuances and tensions that don't contradict but exist at the same time within this situation. And it's difficult to have conversations about any of this because people's hearts are hard and their heads are mad. Okay, now the reason I also said that a pastor in his position should care about the Proverbs as well is because Proverbs chapter 1, let me see here. Proverbs chapter 1, the first couple verses here tell you what their purpose is for. That their purpose is for receiving prudent instruction in righteousness, justice, and integrity. And I forget which of the Hebrew words here. It's either justice or integrity, but I think it's integrity. And the actual Hebrew is equity, which I know is a word that conservatives find to be very evil. They're very allergic to that word because of how it's been weaponized. But God used the word. God used that concept. And the book of Proverbs, in part, is to teach rulers how to be equitable according to the wisdom of God, not according to the wisdom of the world, right? And if you view, as I do, if you view illegal immigrants as America's modern slave class, right? And if that sounds crazy to you, me and my wife kind of broke down that thought process in an episode where we were evaluating Trump's second term. What was it, a few months ago now, I think. And the reason I would say that is because they work, right? Illegal immigrants, for the most part, work, but don't have legal representation, right? That's, to me, that's a slave class. The only difference, the only meaningful difference, I think, is that they chose to come here illegally. So even though they are being exploited by the nation wrongfully, they do have a culpability for their situation that African slaves who were trafficked forcefully did not have. Again, nuance. Whether you love it, whether you hate it, you still got to deal with it, right? But the reason that, I do want to hear out what this lady has to say, even though I think she's out to lunch, spiritually, is because of Proverbs chapter 29, verse 12. The proverb says, if a ruler listens to lies, all his officials will be wicked. So, if the woman's claims are true about all of the unjust things that ICE agents have been doing in St. Paul, Minneapolis, then based upon God's wisdom in the Proverbs, I do turn a side eye towards this guy if he is a field office director. You set the tone. And as a Christian, that tone should be justice, and love. Right? As the proverb says, if a ruler listens to lies, all his officials will be wicked. But you should be able to turn that on its head, right? If all the officials in an area are wicked, then a ruler most likely somewhere is listening to lies. Right? So that's why I say it gives me pause for thought. But the nuance is still not done, okay? Because there are problems from a Christian perspective with this reverend as well, okay? And let's golly, I'll let her talk for a bit, y'all.
I'm also an ordained reverend. Yeah. So I know what the word says. And I know right from wrong. That's right. Jesus, who they claim to worship, went into the so-called houses of God. He flipped over tables. That's right. Because he said, this is not my Father's house. I don't care what you pretend. Right. So that's what we did today. We flipped over a table for truth, justice, and righteousness. Amen. Amen.
Period, she says. But is that true? Okay. If she says that she's a reverend, okay? If by reverend she means deacon, then fine. But, people usually mean, these kinds of boss babe types whenever they say, I'm a reverend. They usually means like an elder level position, and that's just not biblical. Okay, let me show you. Okay, now, again, if you're not a Christian, I understand why you don't like this, all right? But she just quoted, like she just used words from the Gospels to indict this man in the church, which means that you are now subject to correction by verbatim quotes from the scripture. Okay. 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul is very clear. 1 Timothy chapter 2, starting verse 12. I do not allow a woman to teach or to have authority. Let me bring it over here. I do not allow a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. Instead, she is to remain quiet. And the argument that this isn't for all women, this is just cultural. No, because Paul tells you what his reasoning is. It has nothing to do with localized cultural events. He grounds his reasoning in the created order. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and transgressed, right? His reasoning is based on theology from Genesis, which applies to the world, right? If you don't agree with it, then you have a problem with God, all right? I'm not necessarily saying that you're not a Christian if you have a problem with this, because I understand you were probably brought up in the same hyper feminist, anti-male culture that I was. So you got some things to work out with the spirit. But just understand that that is what the text says. Okay? But she calls herself a reverend, right? I'm not going to give her the same kind of leeway that I would just like any old Joe Schmo that's just getting into Christianity, right? You're claiming to be a reverend. You're claiming to be a leader. You're claiming to be a teacher. I got to put the screws to you a little bit tighter. So if she, as she claims, knows the word, I know what the word says, then she's disobedient. All right. She's revealing herself as someone who will twist scripture when it suits her career or life pursuits. I know what the Apostle Paul said. I know that the Apostle Paul got the right hand of fellowship from the other 12 apostles. I know that Jesus himself commissioned Paul to be an apostle. So I know that what is written here is, I know that what's written here is inspired. I'm just not going to listen to it because that would get in the way of my pursuits. Okay, well, if it's okay for you to twist 1 Timothy 2, why is it wrong for the guy that you're coming against to twist the words of Jesus? If you can do it, why can't he? This is why you got to make sure your doctrine's on point, right? And again, more proof in 1 Timothy 3. When you read the qualifications for the elders and overseers, you see that the gender pronoun that Paul uses is he throughout the text. He must manage. He must not be a new convert. But when he starts talking about deacons, that gender pronoun becomes a bit more neutral, a bunch of theys, right? Because women can be deacons, just not elders, right? Now, the lady also says, we flipped over a table for truth, justice, and righteousness. Well, I don't know about that, Chief. All right, I don't know about that, Chief. Remember, Romans 13 cooked their little protest group and Renee Goodman just as much as it cooked ICE. So, deal with that as you want. But more importantly, you may have flipped tables, but did you flip tables like Jesus, i.e., in the name and zeal of his Father? All right, so now we move into the next phase where I show you their little pep talk as a group before they crashed the Sunday service. All right, let me show you. All right, so just listen to what they say here for a bit.
Say justice for Renee Good!
Justice for Renee Good!
Justice for Renee Good!
Justice for Renee Good!
So yeah, that's what they're doing for a little bit, hyping each other up. Come forward a little bit in this little minute here.
Another.
We must love and support one another.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
That's it sounded like Sunday morning. I know it's Sunday morning. And I know we've been on this front line. And I know we're exhausted, y'all. But this also helps our healing process because it actually triggers our vagus nerve. And all of us are sitting on edge right now. So trigger your vagus nerve, relax your body, and really just let it out so the universe really understands why all these thousands and thousands and thousands of people are out here in the streets of Minnesota right now. Right?
Now, I have no problem with the vagus nerve thing, all right? I've seen patients vagal down with less stimulation than a chant, okay? No, my problem is the call to the universe. So the universe understands. Lady, the universe is a collection of inanimate objects. it can't hear you any more than my bag of potato chips in my pantry can hear me. All right? This whole crying out to the universe thing, chanting to the universe, this is new age demonic garbage spirituality that children of Satan, those that are blind to the gospel, say. Right? And yet this reverend is talking to them and leading them as if they have the same concept of truth, justice, and righteousness. All right? When Jesus went into the temple and flipped over tables, he wasn't doing it so that the universe would understand the injustice of the Pharisees. No, he was doing it out of zeal for his Father's house. How many people here in this audience actually have a relationship with the Father that she claims to have a relationship with, actually have a relationship with the Father that Jesus had, right? No, you may be turning over tables, but you're not turning over tables the same way Jesus did, not for the same reason, all right? The concept of justice is not high enough. Now, before we look at the responses from the elders and laity from this church in the midst of the protests that stormed into their church, I want us to look at what Paul says an elder ought to be. All right. So that way we have a rubric here. All right. Titus chapter 1, starting in verse 6. Paul says to Titus, an elder must be blameless, the husband of one wife with faithful children who are not accused of wildness or rebellion. As an overseer of God's household, he must be blameless, not arrogant, not hot-tempered, not an excessive drinker, not a bully, not greedy for money, but hospitable, loving what is good, sensible, righteous, holy, self-controlled. Here's the important bit. Holding to the faithful message as taught, so that he will be able both to encourage with sound teaching and to refute those who contradict it. All right. So I just want that to be in your head as we get into this particular clip. How does he do? You be the judge. But don't be too harsh. Remember to ask yourself, what would you do if it were you?
Pastor of the church. Our church had gathered for worship, which we do every Sunday, and we were interrupted by this group of protesters. Yeah. We asked them to leave, and they obviously have not left. So, what do you think of this? I mean, this is unacceptable. It's shameful. It's shameful to interrupt a public gathering of Christians in worship. So, but there were folks. I have to take care of my flock. Okay, but listen, we live in there's a constitution, the First Amendment, to freedom of speech and freedom to assemble and protest. Yeah. We're here to worship. We're here to worship Jesus because that's the hope of these cities. That's the hope of the world is Jesus Christ. I want to be very respectful. Please don't push me though. We're here to worship Jesus. Yes. That's why we're here. Yeah. Okay. That's why we're here. Okay. That's what we're about. Do you think Jesus would be understanding we're about and love these folks? We're about spreading the love of Jesus. But did you try to talk to them as a no Christian? One is willing to talk. Okay. I have to take care of my church and my family, so I asked that you actually would also leave this building. You don't want us to unless you're here to worship. Unless you're here to worship. I'm always worship. I'm a Christian. We're here to worship. Yeah. We're here to worship. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So that's one of the pastors of the church.
So according to Mr. Don Lemon, that's one of the pastors of the church. I assume this would be a guy that falls under the title of elder because Scripture doesn't recognize pastors. Scripture recognizes elders and deacons. So if you're not a deacon, you're an elder. Okay. And if you're not an elder, you're a deacon. So let's consider how he did. All right. He asked them to leave. These are things I consider to be noteworthy, but you've got the whole clip. He asked them to leave. He said that them protesting there was shameful. He excused himself multiple times there to take care of his flock. We'll talk about that. He emphasized the worship of Jesus as their main point, which definitely sounds good. And he claimed that no one is willing to talk. Now, this is where I say I think he definitely should have done better here. And I think this is where a lot of us can learn something, all right? What I call the charm counteroffensive, all right? The elder slinking off into the background here doesn't help, as much as your initial instinct may lead you to believe. All right? Because I understand why you want to slink away. All right? You don't really trust Don Lemon. You know his reputation. You know what he's got a reputation for. You definitely don't trust the protesters, right? So you're just thinking, all right, just kind of wall it in, put the walls up, put the defenses up, and maybe we can avoid, getting clipped too badly here. Okay? The elder is the theological anchor who holds to the gospel, as Paul said in Titus, encouraging with sound teaching, and he is literally called verbatim to refute those who contradict. Okay? Now, he doesn't do that here, and I want you to notice what happens as a result of him not doing that. Because he doesn't do that here, Don will go on to find Christians in the congregation who will talk. All right? His flock, right? The one that he said he's, I'm not talking to you so I can go attend to them, right? Don is now freely mingling with a live mic and a live stream camera. And this particular live stream so far, we're not, this is only 17 hours after the live stream. We've already got 300,000 views on this. All right. So you wanted to protect your flock, and yet that led to, 3 or 4 different members of your flock having a hot mic put in front of them to an increasing audience of 300,000. All right. It's probably going to be more in the next coming days. All right. Let alone all the other channels that are going to clip and post their reactions and stuff like that. Right. His flock, who presumably may not be as theologically trained or rhetorically trained for debate. Okay. In my humble opinion, sometimes not so humble opinion, the better way to protect his flock in this situation, in my opinion, would be to get on that stage, use that microphone, and try to start a dialogue with the female reverend. Maybe try to start a dialogue with Don Lemon, seeing as he's the one with the mics and the camera, right? I understand this would be an uncomfortable act of self-sacrifice, as he would be solely on the hot seat, but the flock would be spared from the hot mic, would be spared from candid conversations that, as you will soon see, they are not prepared. They were not prepared or in season to have at this particular moment. Okay. Now, the other positive from this tactic is that the elder would put the ball in the protesters' court on Don Lemon's live stream to engage in a dialogue or show themselves to be reasonable or unreasonable. Okay. You got to understand, you got to be savvy enough in the moment to understand there is zero way to prevent a clip going viral here. So you have to get out in front of this with boldness. And again, all of this assumes you're actually innocent of these accusations. Make the conversation gospel and theology focused and intersect all of that with this cultural moment to show the potency of the kingdom's life and love and truth and justice in the public square. That's what I feel like would have been a much better tactic than what we're about to see, the multiple train wrecks that we're about to see. All right, so here we are. This is the first church member, not the elder, not the theological anchor, right? Not the Steph Curry of the congregation. Let's see how he does.
Think of this. I thought you said no.
What I'll tell you is that there are varying arrays of views on the political situation here. That's what I'll tell you.
What do you mean by that?
I'm going to leave it at that. But there's varying array of views in this church on politics of immigration. And recognize the complexity of the issue.
Yeah. Some people don't like what's happening. Some people like it.
I'm not going to reduce it to that. I won't reduce it that simply, but we acknowledge the complexity of the situation.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Now, his basic claim, his basic thing to say, to add to the conversation here is there's a varying array of views in this church on the politics of immigration. All right. That's the kind of answer that says a lot and says nothing at the same time. Okay. Like, I hear what he's trying to say, which is we're not monolithic. All right. There's no groupthink going on here. There's a variety of opinions. That's not what's going to get communicated, bro. Like, what's going to get communicated is that Christians can't add anything to the conversation. All right. This is why the theological anchor needs to be the one speaking to Don right now. All right. I'm sure this guy is a lovely brother in the Lord. I'm sure I'd love to sit down and have lunch with him, worship with him, fellowship with him. But God gave us roles and gifts within the church for a reason. Just like in marriage, husbands and wives need to play to their strength. So too in the church, people need to be playing to their gift sets. All right. The theological anchor needs to be the one speaking to Don right now. Okay. All right. And now on to the second church member. But first, a little aside that Mr. Lemon here will show us.
The pastor, there's one of the members who looks to be really upset, a young person. The pastor's trying to calm him down over there. And yeah, so there you go.
All right. Respectfully, look at how many people are in this church, man, still at this moment, right? You got protesters off over here, but you got a bunch of Christians here, some Christians off, on the side, off screen in the back of the place. All right. Any other saint can be doing the work of consolation for this young brother who I guess is just overwhelmed by all this. But at this particular moment, the theological anchor needs to do what only he can do and be the one on camera, and no one else in the church needs to be on camera right now, bro. No one else in the church. All right. No one else in the church. Not when they're going to say things like what you're about to hear.
You're a member of the church?
What's that?
You're a member of the church?
I do.
How do you feel about this?
I don't necessarily agree with everything that's going on in the Twin Cities right now, but I don't think it's good to fight fire with fire. I think it's good to speak up. I think it's good to protest, but I think it's better to do it in a peaceful way. I don't think the answer is going into God's church.
You don't think this is peaceful?
Well, it's trespassing.
Nobody fighting.
It's trespassing. Okay. How would you feel if I went to your house?
Look, man, he just lost. All right. He put him on the bench. Okay. Painting these protesters at this moment in time as not peaceful because he's uncomfortable is where he instantly loses his credibility on camera. All right. I understand it's a logical fear in the moment that they may become violent, but so far they've been peaceful. They've been quite peaceful. All right. I'm sure that this guy too, I'm sure that he is also a lovely brother and Messiah, but get him off the court and put in Steph Curry. Get the theological anchor into the paint to box out because the bench is stinking it up out there. That being said, I do commend them for doing what they could. They understood. Every single one of these people that is speaking at some level recognized the importance of this moment, recognized the importance of someone giving a good confession, and they stepped forward to fill a gap. But the elder should have been the one doing this. The elder should have been the one doing this. Okay. And the analogy he gives of, the house, how would you feel if you, that's not going to go down paths that he wants it to go down. It's really not. All right. Because the church is not your personal place of residence. All right. It is God's house, but it's not your personal place of residence. All right. Your analogy does not have enough, relevant points of symmetry to be too useful here. So let's move on. All right. So here we have our third.
Just hugging members of the church as they are about to leave. And so an interesting Sunday morning for you. What do you think of this?
I'm a harmless Christian here that wants to praise the Lord with my son, and now I got to go home. I'm sorry that you guys are so angry.
I'm not.
Oh my gosh, bro. Yo, bench this guy too, bro. Put in Steph Curry. Get the theological anchor onto the court to box out, okay? His joke, all right, because it's a joke, but not really, that he introduces himself with, will paint us in the eyes of those opposed as paranoid people with a persecution complex that can't take being challenged, all right? He just checked into the game and his rhetorical powers on life support. Again, I appreciate that he tried to put his best foot forward here, okay? But again, watch what's about to happen.
No, I'm just chronicling. I'm not with the group.
Oh, what do I have to say?
Can you understand why they're angry?
I don't understand any of this because I'm a simple man. I'm a simple man who loves the Lord and is a good father. So this is what we look forward to, is coming, being with our family and praising Jesus. And that's not something that we have to run away from. So this is kind of a bad day for us. But, we're going to heaven. So that's the best news we got.
Do you understand that some of these folks feel voiceless?
I don't understand because right now I'm so upset right now.
Yeah. They're activists.
The simplest thing we can say is that we love you guys.
What do you mean, you guys?
Well, whoever's here in this house.
Okay.
We don't distinguish between Christian and non-Christian. We love everyone. We want everyone to come to heaven.
Yeah.
We want people to go to heaven.
Yeah.
That's the main thing. We want folks to go to heaven. And if we need to talk about these things, then, this isn't the time for that, really.
But don't you think until we go to heaven, if you believe in that there should be some sort of peace here on earth, and that people should have agency, and we shouldn't be beating people up off the street, and we should be abiding by the Constitution?
I didn't want to hit the applause button for Don Lemon. I really didn't. But if dude is basically going to quote James, what do you want me to do, bro? What do you want me to do? Like I said, I appreciate that he tried his best to put his best foot forward here, but with all due respect, if you know you can't speak, then just keep your head down and keep walking, okay? This is how I look at evangelism and confessing the gospel, okay? I think those things have playoff basketball rules. What do I mean by that? Listen, if you don't watch the NBA, I'll tell you how it works, all right? If you are truly injured and don't step on the court because of that true injury, full understanding, we get it. If you're injured and can't play, then you're injured and can't play. On the other hand, if you step on that court, no excuses. No matter the rain, withstand the pain. Play on with heavenly grit, because while you're on this court, what you do actually matters, actually impacts the final score. You will handle the rock of heaven at some point, so don't lose your dribble out there. All right? He turns the ball over like 9 times in this conversation, and Don Lemon is just running antichrist layup lines out here. Running easy antichrist pick and roll on the defense right now. Put him on the bench. All right. A couple times during his rebuttal, Don asked him if he could even understand why people disagreed. And he was like, no, I couldn't possibly. Listen, bro, if you don't understand why someone disagrees, don't whine. Ask why and commit to the uncomfortable conversation, or pass the rock and ride the bench. But again, I can't be too mad at this guy, because as I keep pounding, he shouldn't even be talking to Don Lemon right now. That should be the elder, the theological anchor, who, in God's providence happened to be here this Sunday, needs to be the one running the offense and the defense here. Okay, so let's move on. All right, here we go.
These people have come into our house and they've interrupted our worship.
Oh my. Interrupted is that phrase, bro. Interrupted our house. Interrupted our worship. He just made it about him. His rhetorical power just took a fatal blow right out the gate again. What he's basically saying is, I'm out of season. We're out of season. We weren't ready. We weren't expecting a conversation. I understand that, bro. But the word is clear. Be ready in and out of season. Playoff rules. No excuses. You either handle the rock well and you score a basket, or you pass the ball to an open scorer, or you ride the bench. But those are the only options, right? We're trying to play winning basketball out here, not crying basketball out here. Okay?
This is a house of peace, and we try to proclaim that. And this stirs division and rancor. And in the end, it's not helpful. Ultimately, I believe they've lost. They've emptied a house of worship. Everybody's gone home. Their point has been proven worthless. And so, in the end, I think they lose.
He thinks emptying a house of worship means they lost? Bro, bench this guy, bro. He was not paying attention when the coach laid out the game plan of the enemy team. You don't think Satan's goal is to empty out a church on Sunday? You don't think his goal is to disrupt the fellowship and the worship that happens here by any means necessary? You think this isn't a dub to Satan? Come on, bro. Come on, bro. Again, probably a lovely brother in Christ, but in this situation, strategically useless or close to it. Okay? Close to it.
But more importantly, if I was to break into any of their houses uninvited, cause derision and upset according to their values, I would be kicked out ultimately. It's not a good way. I feel violated. I feel interrupted. I feel angry.
May I ask you something?
Listen, bro. I'm gonna give you all some help. Some help that this guy definitely could have, you desperately needed to hear right now. Okay, appealing to a culture that hates you to pity you is generally a waste of time, energy, and emotion. You are better off spending all of that resource to just confront the prejudice head on and ball out and score a bucket. Okay. All right. There are some players in the NBA that will complain about being double teamed. The greats never do. All right. Kobe, Steph, Jordan. All right. Those guys, they don't complain about being double teamed. They welcome the challenge. All right. Because they're insane. But it's that kind of insanity that you need if you're going to represent Jesus well. I see the double team coming. I see the unfair double standards you have for us. I see all of that, and I want to meet it. I want to meet it, and I want to excel. All right? But all of that is assuming that the nuance that we discussed at the top of the episode isn't in view. This is even worse. This becomes even more egregious than it already is when all that nuance is in view, bro. When people are complaining about injustice, you should hear them out. Now, maybe the evidence isn't there. Maybe it is. But you got to hear them out, because it is never a good look to instantly dismiss people that are complaining about injustice. You will always be painted. You will always be seen as the side supporting injustice every time, and you just instantly, a priori, dismiss people that complain about it.
When you were saying if you had showed up at their house, they're saying that people are showing up at houses where they're citizens or without due process and breaking and entering the house. One that we saw, I've been watching from New York, with a battering ram into someone's private property, and there's no recourse. There's no, you understand what I'm saying?
This is all part of a much larger dialogue, in my opinion. On one side are people who watched a previous administration bring 12 million people in over the course of 4 years, and many of them undocumented, many of them criminals, etc. This is another administration's corrective. Now, whether you agree with the policies or procedures, I think I could actually be sympathetic to some of the things where there have been challenges to fashion and decency. At the same time, these are what are called targeted interventions by ICE to keep the American people safe.
If I respectfully may interject here, I've been out reporting on a lot of these, and they're not targeted. There are no warrants signed by a judge. Let me finish. And they're American citizens, many of them. Most of the people that they detain don't have criminal convictions or criminal records.
I'm not going to get into the weeds.
You should know that, though. Don't you think that's part of it?
Yes, and I could also show you many opposing sides where we're also picking up the very criminals that have put Americans in danger. And I'm not saying it's pretty. I'm not saying it's not messy. I'm not saying it couldn't be better. I'm saying this is a part of a much larger dialogue in which one administration caused a great deal of chaos and havoc and danger for American citizens, and another is trying to correct that.
Do you believe that? Why? Honestly,
Okay.
let me talk to you just on the
not
facts.
a journalist.
Yes, I am. I want to give you the facts.
No.
Did you know that undocumented people and
We're
immigrants
done.
commit
We're
far
done.
less crime
We're done.
than American citizens?
We're done here. We're done here.
Than natural-born Americans? You won't listen.
If you could ask,
I'm giving you the facts. It is.
Give me facts. I would have a.
bro. And that phrase is where you lose. That phrase is where you lose, bro. If you could ask an objective question and not give me facts, bro. I know what he means, but that wording, that phrase, you lose, bro. You lose. All right, and that's where I gotta cut it. All right, because this is getting out of hand. All right, but some final words of advice. Okay, if you're not going to get into the weeds, if you're the kind of person that doesn't want to get into the weeds, all right, if you're the kind of person that will start conversation on a deep topic, and then once things get to be a bit too heated for you, you want to appeal to sympathy and say, well, I don't really want to get into the weeds. Bench him. Bench him. Bench you. Okay? But if you find yourself in a situation like this, just some help on the rhetorical front, okay? If you can't box with raw data, either because you don't know, haven't researched, whatever, right? Then your only other alternative, if you want to continue the argument, is you have to find an internal inconsistency in the argument presented. It's your only remaining option. The question that I would suggest that he asked Lemon at some point in this, I would have asked him this: does entering and remaining in the country illegally not count to you as a criminal offense? And if not, why not? Because that's what his argument hinged on. It's a hidden assumption in Lemon's argument that undocumented immigrants, commit less crime than Americans. Well, maybe that might be true if you ignore the crime that they committed by entering illegally and the crime that they continually commit by remaining here illegally, right? Now, you don't have to try to argue that crime of breaking and entering and harboring illegally, you don't have to try to argue that that's worse than murder. It's not. It's not worse than murder. There's quite a few crimes that are worse than being an illegal immigrant. That's not the point. That's not the argument Don presented. He just said crime. All right? I don't have to have all the facts and figures to ask that question. And I'm curious to see what Don would have done. I feel like Don's best strategy at that point, if he was presented with that question, would be to dodge and evade it. I feel like that's his best rhetorical strat for what it is he's trying to do. But again, all of this could have been avoided, right? All of that sloppiness could have been avoided if the elder got in there and actually boxed out. And I don't know why he didn't, I don't know if he didn't because he was nervous. I don't know if he just made a wrong strategic call. And, the worst potential possibility here is that what is being claimed by this, by this non-Christian looking lady reverend about the injustice that he's a part of actually has some teeth to it. I've been a part of unjust churches before, and when you start pushing them on things, they're not the biggest, they're not exactly so eager to run to the spotlight. Okay, so I can understand all those things being an issue, right? But again, if you find yourself in this situation where your church gets invaded by a protest like this, right, and your church is completely disconnected from anything, your pastors aren't on some sort of ICE board or anything like that. You just got people protesting in your church because you're a Christian and they affiliate you with them, right? Which is increasingly likely to happen to people in this country. So it's best to think about what you would do in a situation like this before you find yourself in a situation like this. And as the elder, you leave your flock that you claim to care about so much to fend for themselves against the likes of professional hunters like Don Lemon and such like that. Nah, bro, you got to play to your strengths. Get in there, be the theological anchor, be Steph Curry, box it out, take the shot, win the game. All right, don't let the bench do what only your superstars can do. All right, but that's all that I got to say. Hopefully you guys learned and were edified by this. Until next time, folks. All right, go do something for Jesus. I'm Saint K. This has been Foreign Saints. Go in peace.